The prairie stretched wide and endless, painted gold by the dying sun. The wind that moved across it carried the smell of dust, sagebrush, and something lonesome, something that belonged only to men who'd spent too long listening to silence. Raymond Hollis sat on his porch, his elbows resting on his knees, his rough hands cradling a pipe that had long gone cold. His eyes, pale as winter sky, followed the horizon as though he expected it to speak back to him. But the land never spoke. It just breathed, steady and wide, like a great sleeping animal. 10 years had passed since the ranch last echoed with laughter. 10 years since Evelyn, his wife, his calm, his anchor, was buried under the old cottonwood tree out by the creek. Since then, Raymond had spoken mostly to the horses. They never judged, never asked about the empty chair across the table or why he sometimes stared at the doorway like he expected her to walk through. That evening, the quiet was thicker than usual. A storm was brewing far off, the sky bruised purple along the edges, thunder grumbling like an old man in his sleep. Raymond liked storms. They made the world match how he felt inside. He was just about to head inside when he heard it, faint at first, like a whisper breaking through the wind. Then again, closer, footsteps, light ones, more than one pair. Raymond straightened up slowly. Strangers were rare this far out, especially after sundown. He reached for the shotgun leaning by the door, not because he wanted trouble, but because the West had taught him that peace was a thing you protected, not trusted. When the figures came into view, he thought at first that the storm was playing tricks on him. But no, there were 5 of them, walking slow, heads bowed against the wind. Women, Apache, by their long dark hair and the woven skirts torn and dirty from travel. Their faces were hollow from hunger, eyes rimmed red from dust and fear. They looked like people who had run a long way and weren't sure if they'd reached safety or another danger. Raymond stepped off the porch. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice carrying over the quiet. The women stopped at once. The tallest among them raised her head. Even through the dusk, he saw the streaks of blood on her hands, the cracked lips. She didn't flinch under his gaze. "We seek shelter," she said, her accent heavy but her tone clear. "Only for the night, please." Raymond lowered the barrel of his shotgun slightly. He wasn't a cruel man. He never had been. But the years alone had carved caution into his bones. "You alone?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Our men, they stayed behind. To fight." He looked past her into the open plains. No sign of pursuit, only the shadows creeping in with the night. He sighed through his nose, an old, tired sound. "Ain't got much," he said. "Beds are taken by dust, and food don't stretch far. We can work," she answered quickly. "Clean, cook, anything." Her voice cracked on that last word, and something inside Raymond shifted. The look in her eyes, it wasn't pleading for herself, but for the others standing behind her. One of them was barely more than a girl. The youngest clutched another's arm for balance, her feet bleeding through worn moccasins. He nodded once, slowly. "Come on, then, before the storm catches you." He turned and walked back toward the porch. For a moment, he half expected them to vanish, like ghosts. But when he looked back, they were following, 5 shadows moving quietly through the twilight toward a house that hadn't known company in a decade. Inside, the air was cool and dim. He lit a lantern, and its glow painted the room in soft amber. Dust floated through the beam like little ghosts dancing. The women stood near the door, unsure. Raymond pointed toward the table. "Sit." They obeyed, carefully. He moved to the stove, poured what beans and cornmeal he had left into a pot, and filled it with water. The sound of boiling filled the silence. For a long while, nobody spoke. Only the wind outside, rattling the window frames. When he finally turned to face them, he noticed how the youngest was staring at the framed photograph on the shelf, the one of Evelyn, smiling in her Sunday dress. He felt a sting behind his ribs, but he didn't look away. The girl met his eyes briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. She knew that kind of loss. They ate quietly when he placed the food in front of them. No one reached for more than they needed. The woman who seemed to lead them, her name, he would later learn, was Nara, waited until the others were done before touching her own bowl. Raymond leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You said your men stayed to fight. Who were they fighting?" Nara's spoon paused midway to her lips. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where thunder flashed faintly on the horizon. "Soldiers," she said after a moment. "They came without warning, said the land wasn't ours. They burned the lodges, the food stores. We took what we could carry." Her voice broke. The others didn't make it. Raymond looked down at the floorboards. He'd seen war. He'd seen how quick men were to destroy what they didn't understand. He knew that kind of cruelty. "You can stay here," he said quietly. "As long as you need." The words came out before he could stop them. Maybe it was Evelyn's voice he heard behind his own, soft and steady, telling him to open the door. Maybe it was just that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone near who needed him. Nara stared at him, unsure she'd heard right. "Stay, you mean, more than tonight?" "I ain't got anyone else," he said simply. "And it looks like neither do you. So long as you pull your weight, this place'll feed us all." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Then, slowly, gratitude softened their faces. One of the younger women began to cry quietly. Nara reached out, touching Raymond's arm in thanks. He didn't pull away. That night, the storm rolled in, drumming on the roof like 100 fists. Raymond lay awake in his old bed, listening to the muffled voices of the women in the next room. They were whispering softly in their language, words he didn't understand, but the tone was clear: relief, grief, and something fragile, like hope. He turned his head toward the empty side of the bed where Evelyn used to sleep. The shadows flickered with the lantern light, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. Outside, the storm washed the dust from the land. Inside, a different kind of storm was settling, the quiet one that happens when hearts start to remember how to feel again. And as Raymond drifted toward sleep, he thought about how strange life could be. 10 years of silence, and then one night of footsteps changed everything. He didn't know who those women truly were, or what trouble might follow them, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't dread the sunrise. He found himself hoping for it. The morning came gentle, washed in the cool blue light of dawn, and for the first time in many years, Raymond did not wake to silence. There were soft sounds drifting through the house, rustling fabric, low voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand, and the light scrape of a wooden spoon against metal. It took him a moment to remember they were there, that the house was no longer a hollow place filled with echoes. He rose slowly, his joints stiff as always. When he stepped into the main room, Nara was already standing near the stove, stirring a pot of something warm, scented and earthy. Two of the women were mending a blanket near the window. The youngest, Tala, was outside sweeping the porch as though she had always lived here. None of them moved with the frantic urgency of people trying to prove their worth. They simply worked with the quiet grace of those who had shared hardship too deep to speak about. "You're up," Nara said softly. Her voice carried a tired strength, like someone who had held others together for so long that she no longer remembered what she carried for herself. Raymond cleared his throat. "I reckon so." The room felt different, not crowded, just full, like the air had gained weight and purpose. Breakfast was simple. Stew thickened overnight, a few dried apples softened in hot water, and coffee brewed from his last good tin. They ate with the kind of silence that didn't press or feel awkward. It was the silence of acceptance, of simply existing near one another. When the bowls were empty, work began without question. The women did not need direction. They saw what needed doing and did it. Repairs to the corral fence. The roof patched. The water trough cleaned. Raymond watched them from the barn doorway, leaning against the frame, his arms crossed loosely. It had been a long time since he had seen anyone work with such quiet steadiness. Tala joined him later by the horses, watching as he brushed the coat of a chestnut mare. Her eyes were soft but curious. "You love them," she said, nodding toward the horses. "Spent more years with them than people," Raymond replied. "Horse keeps heart steady," she said. "When the world tries to break it." Raymond paused, brush halfway down the horse's flank. He looked at Tala, not at her face, but at her eyes. She had seen more than any young person should ever have to witness. He wondered how many families she had lost. How many nights she had walked hungry. How many times she had been told to run when all she wanted was to stay somewhere. "You speak truth," he said quietly. She smiled faintly and continued helping him with the grooming. There were no more words needed. Days passed in a rhythm so natural it surprised Raymond. The house was cleaned, the barns repaired, and the long-abandoned garden behind the house began to show signs of life again. The Apache women worked with a sense of dignity, not debt. They didn't act like guests, they acted like people claiming a place to breathe. And Raymond didn't realize how deeply the loneliness had lived inside him until it began to loosen its grip. One evening, after a long day of mending fences and hauling water, they gathered near the fire outside. The sky above was a deep, endless tapestry of stars. Coyotes called from somewhere far off, but the night felt safe. Nara began to sing. It was a song in her language, low, rhythmic, almost like prayer or wind weaving through canyon walls. The notes rose and fell like small waves, steady and strong. The others joined in, harmonizing softly. Raymond sat with his hands resting on his knees, the song sinking into him like warmth. For the first time in so long, he didn't feel like he was watching life from a distance. He was part of it, present, breathing with others. When the song faded, Raymond spoke. Not much, just a few words he had never once said since Evelyn died. "My wife used to sing," he murmured. "She had a voice that could make the house feel full." Nara looked at him, eyes gentle. "She still fills it. You kept it alive." He didn't answer. His throat felt tight, but he didn't walk away, either. He stayed by the fire with them until the flames burned low and only embers glowed. The peace did not last long. 2 days later, dust rose on the horizon, the unmistakable sign of horses approaching. Raymond saw it first, his eyes trained by years of watching the land. His body tensed, though he stayed calm. Nara saw it next. Her face changed, not fear, but readiness. Raymond went inside and retrieved his rifle. Not to attack, but to stand. The riders came into view, 3 men, armed, their expressions mean with the confidence of those who believed the world belonged to them. They rode up close enough for dust to settle against the house porch. "You harboring savages, Hollis." The lead man spat, not bothering with courtesy. Raymond stood squarely on the porch, rifle in his hands, but not raised. "These women ain't done harm to nobody. They're under my protection." The man laughed harshly. "Protection? From you, old man, you ain't got the strength to fight off a shadow." Tala stepped beside Raymond. Her presence was quiet, but unshakable. The other women approached too, not behind Raymond, but beside him. The leader's expression shifted, just enough to show he hadn't expected that. "We came to finish what was started," he growled. "That village was cleared for a reason." Raymond's voice dropped low, not loud, not threatening, but solid enough to strike the ground like a stake. "There's 2 kinds of men in this world," he said. "Ones who destroy what they fear, and ones who protect what they understand. I know which one I am. The question is, do you?" The silence that followed was thick and sharp. The wind shifted, the horses stamped, the men looked again, not at Raymond, but at the women standing with him. Their posture, their unity, their refusal to bow, and something in the men broke first, not courage, but certainty. They spat in the dirt. Then they turned their horses and rode away, leaving dust in their wake. Raymond didn't lower his rifle until the horizon swallowed them, but when he did, he exhaled a breath that felt like it had been held for 10 years. Nara placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You did not stand for us," she said softly. "You stood with us." Raymond looked out at the prairie, glowing gold under the fading sun. And in that moment, he understood something he had not allowed himself to believe for a very long time. Life was not finished with him. Not yet.